Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
In the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. This week's show is brought to you by Uncle Ted's Psychic Lubricant and Cold Remedy. It's a cold tonic and something to help you photograph your thoughts. You can take it for the psychic powers and the way it makes you feel. And if anybody asks, it's just for your cough. Uncle Ted's Psychic Lubricant and Cold Tonic. So on this show today, we're I like to joke around a lot, but today we're taking things seriously. And my guest in doing this is something we had talked about since before the show started, before there even was a show. So it's exciting to have my very first return guest. You may know him from such episodes as cruising in RoboCop's Pink Caddy, or from the socials where he posts his broken rock and roll trading cards. It is the one and only, definitely not a bum or a bastard, Blackwolf John Oates.
I think I can at least be one of those things, and I mean, at some point in my life, I probably will be. But thank you. It's glad to be back. Great to be back.
Yeah, if you were to ask Motley Crue, they would probably call you at least a bum or a bastard.
I'm sure they would call me a lot worse, but I think I've checked with friends of mine who know these things, and my complaints and my words against Motley Crue are ironclad and legal. They did that shit, and I know they did that shit. So, Vince Neil, you want to come at me? Bring it on.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. So today, like I said in the little intro there, is a case that you and I are both fascinated with, because I think this falls into kind of a category in general where there are paranormal things and people and stories that I feel like used to get talked about a lot more, and these days you don't hear about them nearly as much. And often that's because people just consider it that it was a hoax or whatever, and like it was just a little novelty, like a little blip on the radar of paranormal history, and people forget about it. And that is the case of Ted Serios projecting thoughts onto film, and the book about him called The World of Ted Serios by Jule Eisenbud. And so well, I guess I'll just start. Like, what is it about this case that that drew your attention as something that we should talk about?
It was one of those things that I think, like, I would imagine almost anybody listening to this right now, we're probably all library nerds, and spent a lot of time at the library in the unknown section, the paranormal section, checking out any book under that title. And it just seemed like, and since most of those books were from like that nice, like 70 through 75 heyday of paranormal publishing, where every book had the same thing in it, and they all had Ted Serios in those books. And it's just one of those things I saw all the time as a kid, read about 1,000 times, saw all the famous pictures of the Chicago water tower and whatnot. And I just, it's one of those things that if only looking at those books, you'd think that this was a very important case in, paranormal, literature. And then, I guess unlike a lot of your listeners, probably, I spent a lot of time away from the paranormal. I kind of faded away from it throughout like high school and whatnot and college. And when I came back to it, it's one of those cases where I'm like, where the hell is Ted Serios? What happened to this guy? It just like, this guy projected thoughts onto film and we don't talk about him anymore. It just seemed like it was a very important thing for a while. And then one day people stopped caring about Ted. And I've always wondered why.
Well, I think Yeah, and I think that's due in no small part, even subliminally almost, to the fact that it's kind of one of those where even if you don't necessarily know that it's a hoax, people will kind of assume it was, right, or assume since we're not talking about it anymore, it must have been, and
Yeah.
that's why they stopped talking about it at some point. And uh, in looking into it, when you read the book now, I mean, it should be noted, as we both noted looking into this, that if you want like an account, if you want multiple different versions of the Ted story, you're shit out of luck, because really what
Yeah.
we have is Dr. Jule Eisenbud was the one studying this, and really the only one
Well,
taking a
there.
very detailed account of it, not for
It's
lack of trying on his part, though.
Yeah. It seemed like there was like that. Like there was like a Fate magazine article, and then like
Hmm.
something else before this book, and that was it. And
Right.
people had tried to get people interested in this story, and it just didn't happen. And then was Mr. Dr. Eisenbud was became fascinated. It became like a quest of his to like this was going to be the case or whatever that he could use to prove this stuff was real.
Yeah. I mean, it was actually the editor at the time of Fate, Curtis Curtis Fuller,
Yeah.
was the one that introduced them, because he wrote a letter
Mm-hmm.
to Eisenbud in response to an article that Eisenbud had written, that didn't make him very popular with a lot of other psi researchers at the time.
Oh, that's
Um,
right. That's right. Yeah.
yeah, and that's kind of what begins the whole story. And it's kind of funny to think that, like, quite literally, when especially since Jule Eisenbud, as we'll get into, is a psychoanalyst in
Mm-hmm.
training. He comes from the kind of Freud psychoanalysis school, um, and so it's kind of funny that literally fate brought them together. Uh,
Oh, oh, that's right. Beautiful. The kind of wordplay they come to this podcast for. Beautiful stuff.
yeah, yeah, but I mean that's kind of like what uh, a lot of psychoanalysis is based on, is that kind of play on words, like dream
Oh yes.
images, that,
Oh,
and
there's a big old steaming pile of word analysis deep in that book about Queen Elizabeth.
yeah.
I don't know if you remember that part. That part I had to put the book down for a moment and give a good hearty chuckle. That one was stretching a little bit of credulity there, but
That was
uh,
stretching quite a bit, yeah. And it was funny too, because he really overlooked the more obvious one, which just that it was the Queen Mother, and Ted had like mommy issues,
he
basically,
he
right?
did touch on that.
So
He did mention that the Queen Mother and Ted's mom thing. He did touch on that, but he really stretched the whole. I mean, I don't know if we should get into that yet because there's a lot of story left to get to tell. But yeah, his whole was it the nuclear submarine? He was trying to find a nuclear submarine called the Thresher,
yeah, yeah, and
and he
he
produced
was
a
trying to
picture
make
of
that a hit. Yeah.
and he produced a picture of Queen Elizabeth, and Dr. Eisenbud does some serious uh there's a woman named Esther involved somehow too. There's Esther Ted's
Esther is
mom.
Ted. Yeah, Esther
It's
is
Ted's
Ted's
mom.
mom.
That's right. Okay. So this whole thing with like Thresher, Esther, Queen Mother, or Queen Elizabeth, or something like that, and then just mixes the letters up, and he's like, "You see?
Well, yeah, it was like the Latin name for the queen.
Yes,
Yeah, so
yes. It
the
was
official
stretching
title.
it a bit.
Right, right. But yeah, I mean, to do this a little bit in order, is Eisenbud is brought to meet Serios as an example of something that could be shown as a repeatable psychic experiment that
Yeah.
could, it kind of refutes Eisenbud's idea of the elusiveness of this kind of phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think what we're getting at there, but we were getting a little ahead of ourselves. But just
Yes.
for the
Yes.
audience that maybe doesn't know, the whole thing that made Ted a really interesting subject was, the way they set up these tests. Eisenbud was doing everything he could to set it up scientifically and with the right parameters to ensure that there was no fraud, and there were all these layers to it, right? So
Yeah.
anytime they had a sitting, the idea was that Ted was supposed to psychically project his thought onto the camera's film,
Yes.
um, and there was a whole group of people around, and sometimes he was able to do this, but it usually
Yes.
took quite a while to get to this
Yeah,
point.
and like, well, the process was that Ted would use an old Polaroid, correct? An old model of Polaroid camera was what he
Yeah,
preferred or whatever, and so they would get like 4 or 5 people there, other doctors and wives and people's kids and stuff. They would all be there to witness this, and there'd be someone taking notes, and they'd all bring their own cameras. They'd all bring a bunch of their own films, and then Ted would start doing his thing where he'd start looking at the cameras, he'd look at the camera and then tell him when to trigger it, or he'd trigger it himself, and they'd start pulling out the pictures, and usually it would start off with Ted not getting anything, correct? If I'm not
yeah,
trying to
right.
remember how this would usually go. It would probably usually start off slowly, but as the night wore on, and sometimes like looked like up to like 5-6 hours at a time,
Right.
they would just start going through rolls and rolls of film, and Ted would start getting excited, and he'd start saying, "I'm getting hot."
Yeah. Taking his clothes off and stuff.
Just take his clothes off. Oh, I think have we mentioned the fact that Ted was a raging alcoholic yet? I think that's an
No, we
important
have
part of
not.
this.
Yeah.
Yes, it's important to mention that Ted Serios is a mid-50s. He's like mid-50s, chain smoking, hair trigger, crazy, raging alcoholic Chicago bellhop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
unemployed bellhop. That was kind of the funniest point. It like he's always described as having been a bellhop, and because that's the only job he ever had for any length of time that was stable. And
yes.
that's an important thing here, is that the stability was not something that worked well with Ted Serios. He didn't like
Yeah.
regularity, and the only time he ever had a stable job was as a bellhop at the Chicago Hilton. And
It
otherwise,
actually
yeah, you're right. He was an alcoholic. He was a live wire. He
it
was
makes it
completely
difficult to talk
unpredictable.
about him, even because the whole thing is so scattered and bizarre, and was just like a very narrow slice of this guy's life. So
Right.
it's very difficult. I don't know about you, but I've been trying to explain this to my girlfriend and to my friends for like 3 weeks, and I'm just like, the hell are you talking about?
Right.
It's such a difficult story to like really to put your thumb on and hold it down, because it's just like Ted himself, it's very squirrely. It's very
Yeah.
hard to pin this down and really give a decent like thumbnail sketch of like what the hell this is all about. I mean, I'd say we're trying to start from the beginning, but it's just it's so easy to go off on tangents about this. It's very difficult to
Well,
pin it
right.
down.
I mean, in speaking about this show, and probably how long we'd be talking about it, I was like, it's hard to say, because
Yeah.
I was talking to my wife, my muse Pam, um,
Your muse.
about the show today, and it's just like, um, you could just say there was a guy who could take psychic photographs basically of his thoughts, and a doctor that studied him, and he did that for a couple of years and then was unable to again. Like, end of story.
Yes.
And you could say that, or you could talk about it for an hour and a half, and that ends up being like the only way to briefly describe what we're talking about here.
Yeah, because you keep finding stuff going, no, wait, hold on. Let me go back a step. Let me go back a step.
Right.
And you have to
Yeah.
keep going back and like layering it on. And because it is such a fascinating story. And Ted is just a straight character. He's great.
Yeah. He's a likable character at an arm's length. Like, I get the feeling that he's like really fun to read about, but if I
Yes.
had to deal with him for the lengths of time that Eisenbud was asking people to deal with him,
Yeah. It's like,
let
I think,
alone the amount of time he dealt with him,
yeah,
which was
I
several
think
years.
we're,
You
no,
know?
I'm saying we're trying to, we're trying to explain how these experiments went. And we're already way off topic again, because it's
Right.
so hard to talk about this guy. Cause like, so like, they'd bring Ted into a house or a hotel room or a laboratory or any place, and it would start off with this guy trying to put his thoughts onto Polaroid film. It's not happening. He's getting pissy. Everyone's getting upset and get kind of bored. Then Ted starts drinking. They start trading drinks for pictures, and then Ted starts getting, like, about 6 hours in, Ted starts getting hot, and when he starts getting hot, they start getting what they call whiteys, which is when the picture's all white, like fully exposed, which isn't supposed to happen when you have your hand covering or you're covering up the lens.
Right.
And then when they start getting whiteys, they'd start, and then after that, Ted would get excited and they start like handing him cameras at a feverish pace, and he's just snapping photos off, and then suddenly things appear.
Right. Yeah, and pictures of things.
Yeah, of usually buildings,
right,
or cars, or occasionally people.
Right.
So
yeah. And one really important part that we do have to mention here as well, for especially people that aren't familiar with him, is the gizmo.
Yes,
the gizmo is really important because that's the most suspicious part of the whole story. Yes. And what people will point to right away as the reason that he's able to, quote, fake this.
Yes.
And the gizmo is basically a tube. He would often make it. I always thought he had like a device.
Yeah, same here. And I always pictured kind of like a long, like 6-inch length of like PVC pipe, almost, is what I always kind of pictured in my head.
Right.
But it probably was much smaller than that, which surprised me.
Yeah, it only seemed to be like an inch or two long most of the time. What they said was he would use the black cover that would be around the film from the Polaroid.
Yeah.
The Polaroid films. It was just kind of like a packaging product that you would normally throw away, and he would roll it over so that it became a tube, and then he'd be looking through it like it was a sight glass.
Yes.
Like one of those like old ship's captain sight glasses or something.
He put it over the lens of the camera and look into it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that helped him, I guess, focus his psychic energy or whatever.
That was his claim, that it helped him focus. And sometimes he would hold it. Sometimes he'd ask other people to hold it. Sometimes other people would hold it as a means of trying to like thwart any sort of, trickery. But yeah, I was very surprised to find out it was like no bigger than like a little, like very, very small, like I can't even describe, like a film canister.
Well, like small
size.
enough that that if you had your fingers curled around it, it would be totally concealed in your hand. Like
yes.
So yeah, and the other important part to note about the gizmo is that it's spelled GISMO.
Yes.
Because Ted is more or less illiterate. Anytime you see any examples of his writing, he can't spell for shit.
They said he dropped out in the 5th grade, I believe, was what they said. Yeah, 5th grade dropout.
5th grade dropout, even though he claimed to have been a whiz at school.
He just didn't like it, yes.
Yeah, this is the other part. This is another really difficult part here, is that we don't really have a good account of Ted's life because we only have Ted's story, and his story is sketchy as hell, and he's an unreliable narrator.
Yeah, I'd only be instructed to say that Ted Serios is a fucking liar. Like, he is a tall tale teller of the highest order. There's nothing reliable about Ted Serios.
Yeah, and he's also a legend in his own mind. And they go into great depths with this, is that he doesn't seem to perceive. It's a great title for the book, The World of Ted Serios, because that is what it is to Ted. Like, the world revolves around him. Yes. And anything that doesn't affect him directly or interact with him or reflect him to himself in some way doesn't matter. It's just
Eisenbud said that people around Ted were only judged as far as their relationship to Ted and how they felt, or how he felt they felt about Ted. Like, no one was ever just a good guy. It was a good guy if Ted liked him, or he was nice to Ted, or he believed Ted, or he was a bastard or a bum if he did anything in any way to thwart Ted and Ted's desires. So yeah, and I know it is a great title for the book, and I really do wish there was more of the world of Ted Serios in this book, because I would love to spend about a week there.
Yeah.
It sounds fantastic. I've had this book, just a small piece of Blackwolf John Oates trivia. This is the first book I ever bought off Amazon.
Oh wow.
It's like 22 years ago. My friend, I was in my early 20s. There was a good year where I was too broke to afford the internet. Um,
Yeah.
so I moved in with a friend of mine who had a DSL line, which was just like, heaven on earth. And he was like, I'm like, Amazon, what's this? And he was like, you could buy books here? And I was like, I've been looking for this book for like a big chunk of my life. And I was like, do they have this book? And like, it's only costs a penny. And I ordered a
Yeah.
copy of the World of Ted Serios, and I ordered also a copy of the 12th Planet, Zechariah Sitchin. So
Yeah.
really important day of my life right there. Two very
There you
important
go.
books. But I've been trying to read this book for like 20 odd years. It's been sitting on my shelf unread forever. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this was to force myself to read this book. And I'm not, there's no regrets there. I'm glad I read this book now.
Yeah.
Because
Although it's written in a pretty dry clinical style by
that I did want to
Eisenbud.
say that there is about the middle third is it's bad. Middle third, there's like 40 pages where Ted's name isn't mentioned once. And
Right.
like, for a book that's called The World of Ted Serios, it seems odd. An odd
Yeah.
choice to make.
But I mean, getting back to that inner world of Ted, um, I found it interesting that the way Jule Eisenbud described him is that like he had no interest in watching TV or like
Mhm.
reading, and if he's just left to his own devices, he would quietly sit drinking and chain smoking cigarettes and just kind of staring off into space.
Yeah.
Like there was like an interior world, and like he didn't want to watch TV because it wasn't about him. Like
Yeah.
he wasn't
Also,
interacting with it, you know?
when he'd be brought into a person's house, because it seemed like for like about a year there in the city of Denver that Ted Serios was like the parlor trick of the year. You gotta have this
Right.
guy over for dinner. uh call Jule, he'll bring his friend Ted over, you gotta see this shit. And it just seems like Ted was like the dinner guest to have that season. But they said like before the festivities of Ted taking pictures would start, he'd just sit by himself in the corner. He wouldn't talk to anybody. He'd just sit and drink and smoke and wait until it was Ted time, you know?
Yeah.
And then it was boom, Ted's here. All right.
Or he'd get restless and just take off,
Yeah.
and then he'd end up getting arrested or something like that, or getting beat up at the bar. Like,
He got beat up a lot. That's right. He did. He got his ass handed to him a couple of times.
yeah,
And there was also some less than savory things about Ted and a 16-year-old psychiatric patient. Yeah,
yeah,
Ted was not a very yeah, you said earlier, from a distance, Ted's a fun character, but there's obviously an unsavory side to Ted. Although
right,
he
right.
liked animals a lot, though, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, he had these good qualities where apparently he loved animals more than people. Like he
Yes.
generally, and he had almost kind of a preternatural knowledge of them being within range,
Mm-hmm.
where like he would just notice a bird like mid sentence stop and be like, "Oh, check out that little fella over there," and it would be a
Yeah.
bird that was like inside a bush, and it would be pretty far away. It would be just really hard to see, but he's just like, "Whoop, there's a bird over there," or like knowing about a dog that was dangerously close to being in the road several blocks away where he couldn't even really see it
Yeah,
and being upset about it.
there was a story about, yeah, like a dog trying to cross the street, and Ted like holds up traffic for the dog to cross the street, and then he
Right?
starts yelling at a guy with no legs who was holding up
Yeah.
traffic crossing the street. Like, oh god, Ted, what a great guy.
And
uh,
around kids, he was really good with
yeah,
kids.
he was great. Kids loved him. Kids,
Right.
when you go to these dinner parties, the kids would just would he talk to the kids before like the show, but then when all the stuff would get started, the kids would love it. They'd love to be a part of it. And Ted loved like the kids holding the camera or like handing the camera
Yeah.
to him and stuff like that. So yeah, he was a showman, but yeah, he was not comfortable with people if they weren't servicing Ted's needs or whatever. So yeah, it was
Well, as long as they weren't bastards or bums.
or
He was, yeah,
bums and bastards.
yeah. I was hoping for the word crumb bum. I
Yeah,
was hoping that would
you
pop
think
up.
Crumbum would make an appearance, but unfortunately, no, it didn't. You think I think Crumb Bum is just too much for Ted. He's just very simple, bums bastard. No more than that.
Right. Sometimes assholes. He would say
there were
assholes.
there
Sometimes,
were
yeah.
assholes too. I think there was a couple of quotes. I wrote down some quotes. I'll have to dig them up because they were just so damn good. But
Yeah.
where were we as far as his we were talking about, you see, again, we're off topic because this is the world of Ted.
Well, no, I'm
Um
talking about him and the way he in the way he interacted with the world and um how he perceived it, so just kind of giving an overall character assessment of Ted. So I don't think
yeah.
we're far off topic. um
Yeah, I
because
mean, oh, go ahead.
because that whole thing about kids and animals really just drove home to me that he really was a kid. He was kind of an overgrown kid. Like when
Yes.
he left school at fifth grade, he experienced the freedom of being like still a kid, but not um not encumbered with the school life of a kid. And I don't think he ever mentally progressed past that.
Oh
He
no.
wanted to forever be the dropout fifth grader that he was at
I
that
mean,
time, just hitting the road and doing whatever you
I think
know
you think he pretty much was. I mean, he was definitely just, yeah, he's a large child. And
yeah.
yeah. I think well, I don't know. Where do you want to go next? Before we get more off topic here, because we could just do this all day. Where do you want to go next? Let's try to keep it. Let's be the anti Teds and put some structure to the anti structure of Ted Serios here.
Well, that's actually where I was about to go, so maybe you just psychically intuited that. But
Shit, get a Polaroid. I'm hot. I'm hot. Where's my gizmo?
but those of you familiar with your George P. Hansen or maybe old Paratopia episodes will recognize the word anti-structure. Um, and never was there like a truer embodiment of anti-structure there than Ted Serios, because he never, like we said, he never really held down a job. He never really lived a normal life. He basically did what he wanted to do, and um, didn't have any kind of structure like any one of us would normally have. And maybe I I would venture to say definitely that's why he was able to produce results. You know.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, what did you?
like,
How did you describe him?
well, yeah, I mean, I like when I was thinking about, because I just think probably because because it takes place in Denver. Like, Ted's from Chicago, correct?
Right.
But
Yeah.
Dr. Eisenbud's in Denver, and at some point he pays for Ted to come to Denver and live like in his building or his apartment building or whatever, and so
Yeah.
he could kind of keep an eye on Ted, gave him a stipend, try to keep him around, so you have access to him because apparently these photo sessions would take a lot out of Ted. He could only do like one a week, but they were trying to find a way to make him do this more often at less stress. And so he paid for Ted to come out to Denver and live with him. And then like Ted would get really irritable, get bored, and then go back to Chicago, and then come back to
Yeah.
Denver and go back to. So I guess just because it was Denver, I thought they. He's like some kind of like Neil Cassidy figure, like from
Right.
like On the Road, just like this fucking maniac packing all of his stuff up in like an old Studebaker and just gunning into Chicago overnight, and
Right.
then wiring, asking for money, and then just showing up a week later back at your door, like asking for
Yeah.
scotch. With like
Right.
with like a 16-year-old girl with him. It's like, Jesus, Ted, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, it's like it's just my imagination of Neil Cassidy crossed with like, like Kreskin or like Uri Geller or something. I don't know. Like,
See,
it's
I feel like we ought to do a sketch where like this is like a '60s sitcom TV show, and like, you have the
Ted.
wild and crazy Serios character that's supposed to be producing psychic results, and the doctor just kind of like, oh, Ted.
Ed. But yeah, it does seem like, yeah, if he would definitely I'd imagine in this situation to be played by Don Knotts. I don't know why. I just see Don
Yeah,
Knotts. Who I don't know who else could play him. I think it would have to be in the 70s though. Definitely have to be a 70s
I
kind of
don't
a
know, maybe
sitcom.
like Jack Klugman.
Klugman, maybe, but yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. But there's
Right.
definitely someone out there who's the perfect Ted Serios. But he
Somebody
was
that's no longer with us.
no longer. Oh, definitely. I don't think if you're gonna show the age of Ted Serios, you definitely can't be a man who takes care of himself. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, so yeah, he was just this wild man driving back and forth from Chicago to Denver. On, I like we said. I mean, I think we talked about this. Like, he did. Dr. Eisenbud did give him a stipend, but I don't know how much it was.
Right.
Like, how this man had managed to survive all those years and just bouncing back and forth is. Um, I had to assume there was some unsavory ways of gaining money, perhaps in
Yeah.
there.
That's what I wondered too. And I mean, maybe Eisenbud couldn't speak to that if he didn't know about it, but and maybe he intentionally didn't know about it. But I assumed that there was some kind of hustle going on.
Oh,
Like
definitely. Yeah, he's
there must have
definitely.
been a side hustle, you know?
Well, I mean, he has because there's a part where Eisenbud talks about during the photography sessions, like he would like tell people what they had in their wallets or like tell people
Hmm.
what kind of house they lived in. Like there's definitely like a huckster carny quality to like Ted Serios. Like I bet I can tell you where you got those shoes.
Yeah.
That kind of like huckster quality to Ted Serios. So I would almost guarantee that there's like some kind of like, you know, card mind reading card shenanigans in a bar room somewhere like in Kansas City.
Yeah. I mean, because yeah, that sounds like those are the kinds of things that you would get with like as party tricks from somebody that knows a little basic mentalism or sleight of hand or magic tricks is like that little those little things. But that was also part of the experiment, which
Yeah.
I think is funny because the average experiment would go that the people that came to witness it would bring their own camera, like you said, and their own film,
Yeah.
but they would also bring a photograph that was in an envelope that you couldn't see through.
Yeah.
And that was the target. So Ted not only was supposed to be projecting an image onto film, it was an image he didn't know existed and he hadn't seen. Right?
Hmm.
He only knew there was an image in an envelope, and he had
Yeah.
to already know what that was in order to project it.
Yeah.
So he's doing two different psychic operations at the same time.
Impressive. Yes.
And then, yeah, so it didn't count as a hit unless it touched on the target, which to me was astounding.
That I forget. I wrote it down somewhere. I can't find whoever that doctor was who was like, "Oh yeah, he did it. There was a building on the film, but it wasn't the one I picked, so
Right.
it had to be a miss." Like, you fucking kidding me? What are you talking about? That the that, oh, I can't. That made me so angry. I had to put the book down for a minute. Like, well, so you got
Yeah,
to,
because
yeah, oh,
it's such a weird thing. Like the way that, and it's funny to me too, because you'll see people within the paranormal that talk about, oh, science doesn't take this seriously, or we need better scientific approaches to this, or the people that pretend they're doing science.
mhm.
There's a lot of people out there. Well, I tend to do this scientifically, and then they go on to talk about things that's not at all scientific or controlled, or
Yeah,
or peer reviewed or anything like that. But the way parapsychology has always been the way the data has always been interpreted to me has always been really strange. And when you actually look at the numbers, sometimes it's either more or less impressive than you thought from the
yeah,
outset. And this is a good example of that, where like it's kind of like if he produced a gigantic cathedral of a photo and the person was looking for like a little cottage on
yeah.
a lake, and they're just like, well, I mean, he got a photo, but that is not what I wanted.
That's not what I
Like
wanted. Yeah,
he's still psychically projected a photo. So like it's like if you're just looking at numbers as hits versus not hits, and you count that as not a hit, then you need a more complicated rubric for
yeah, and
analyzing this data.
well, and Eisenbud gets frustrated by this too, because he's like, this extra layer is hampering this.
Right,
Because if we're just talking about, because what are we trying to do here? We're trying to project thoughts on film. He's
right,
doing that,
right,
but Ted insists on this other level. Ted insists on a target. So Ted's making it harder on himself to be taken seriously. And all Ted wants is to be taken seriously. In fact, he demanded a PhD at one point.
Yeah, he wanted
Just
an
give me a
honorary.
PhD. He just
Oh,
I don't think he wanted an honor. He just wanted a PhD. And but yeah, Ted was making it harder on himself to even get it right, to get the respect he demanded. Because Eisenbud just was just like, can we just if we just tell them we're putting thoughts on film and you put thoughts on film, then we win. We get what we want.
Right.
You're making this harder, but I have to do it this way. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, speaking of him wanting to become Dr. Serios, I guess, getting an honorary doctorate, um, he did get to experience that a little bit when he got arrested and he told them that he was Dr. Eisenbud.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to bring this up because if you weren't, I was going to. Yes, he got arrested for public drunkenness. Or was it drunk driving?
Probably.
Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
was drunk driving. Told him he was Dr. Jule Eisenbud, and then gave out psychoanalysis in in the jailhouse to all the guards. And he told them,
Yeah.
I really fucked him up.
They were all bastards anyway.
He purposely gave him bad advice. I was like, that's just awesome. I love this guy.
But he did enjoy being treated like an intellectual while they thought
Absolutely,
he
he
was
did.
a
Well,
psychologist. Yeah. So
I think one of the misconceptions is that Ted was stupid. Is he's not. He was very bright. He was very
right.
perceptive, and he was very slick.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't doubt that Ted had a pretty severe drinking problem. It seemed like I don't think you can put down that much liquor and not have one. But I do think that was all part of a con, you know, to put people at ease, to put people, you know, off guard around him, or to sell him short, because it makes his little if you sell him short, think he's just crazy. Then when he does get it correct, does put, you know, a thought on film, it makes it all the more impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's also kind of classic misdirection in a way. You know?
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, it's tough because I tend to I'm leaning in favor of this phenomena was legitimate. So from the outset here, that's what I'm going to lean toward. I can't say for sure, but I don't buy any of the skeptical explanations for what it was that Ted was doing.
There were too many, because I mean we've only talked about the way that it was done normally, like normally in quotes here, because like the way they would want it to go was that, you know, Ted sits there, they put the gizmo, he takes the picture. They did shit like take the lens off the camera. They went in other rooms and took pictures in other rooms while Ted thought at them, you know, and put him in a Faraday cage. They put him in a lead lined room. They put him, you know, just they changed the format so many times, and they still got something on most of those occasions. And I'm with you. I'm not gonna for any way try to explain how this guy did this. If he faked it or not, I'm equally impressed. I really don't care. But yeah, I'm leaning towards something was going on with this, with what Ted was doing. I can't put any kind of logic to it. I can't explain how he did this.
Yeah, and regardless of what happened and how it happened, the photos themselves are pretty damn cool.
Yeah, they are. I was actually thinking, like, you know, we're finally getting around to doing some redecorating around our house, and I'm like, these would look really cool. Like if I took these out and I printed them out on photo paper and framed some of these, they look pretty rad on my wall. I think I might do this.
Right. Yeah. I guess all the photos are in a collection at the University of Baltimore, Maryland.
Yes.
The Eisenbud collection is in there, and I'm like, man, I wonder if they'd part with one. Like,
I know. I would 100% pay for an authentic Serios, 100%. But no, I and like, there's just, I could talk for hours about like how cool some of the photos are, but there's I don't know where you want to go next with this, but yeah, there's an unreality to the photos that I find very fascinating. You know, I look at them and I mean, do we want to get into the dream logic, or where do we want to go next
actually, yeah, because they do have this kind of surreal, dreamlike kind of quality to them. and they kind of reminded me of what I was talking about a couple episodes back with the Twilight Zone. There's
Mhm.
this one episode, Perchance to Dream, where he's like at a carnival and everything's kind of, it's
Yeah.
like they used the fisheye lens in some of it and like
Mhm.
turned it sideways and like parts of it are blurry.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like there's a warpedness to every picture and everything's a little bit off.
Mhm.
And Eisenbud recognizes this as like what your brain does to images in a dream, the
Yeah.
way it will subvert things so that they don't make sense in a physical reality, and
Mhm.
they're just ever so slightly different. And um, yeah, I mean, I absolutely love them. I find the ones, especially with people, to be really kind of off-putting and eerie.
Yes.
Uh, there aren't that many of those, but I mean, like, there's one that I took a picture of out of the picture in the book. Um, just three men standing in a line,
Yes. Are
and
you gonna
they're
put
just
some of
kind of
these? You gonna put some of these like on Instagram or whatever with the?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
good, good, good,
Oh
good.
yeah, for sure. I'll probably have a whole week of just sharing Serios photos when this
Sweet.
is out.
Excellent. Because if you weren't, I was going to. I was like, these are
Oh, we
two.
both can. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean the three men standing together, I mean, that gave me like Men in Black vibes, like Albert
Yes.
Bender's Three Men, you know, and like
There's another
um
one like a page or two over from that one with like people sitting in a field that they're shot
yeah,
from behind. That one's really great too. I really like that one. Uh, no, and like
yeah,
there's one quality that Eisenbud talks about too that they're shot from impossible angles and from like any some of the photos that were able to actually kind of like recognize, like put to a place, they would go to
yeah,
those places and not figure out how if there was trickery, if they took a photo, if Ted took a photo of the water tower, or like was it the Denver Opera House, whatever the place that he got a picture of, and there would be no way to get this photo. Like
right.
you'd have to like raise a guy on like a platform, like 30 feet in the
Yeah, you'd
air
have
and try to do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
you'd have to have some kind of bucket lift or something, and it would be like in the middle of the street, hovering 30 feet off the ground or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and even then, you wouldn't be able to do it with a Polaroid camera. Like
Yeah.
that was one thing they found, is that there were certain things that you would have to do with the lens to focus it correctly with a different
Yeah.
kind of camera that the
Yeah.
Polaroid didn't allow you to do. So somehow he was still capturing fine details like that
Yeah.
with a camera that should never have been able to pick that up.
But also like there was either like there's the famous one of the Canadian Mounted Police
Yeah,
hangar that the word Canadian's misspelled. Or there's the Chicago Water Tower, which has windows, but in Ted's picture, the windows were crosses. Or
yeah,
there'd be
can't get to
slight
the top. Yeah,
architectural flaws. There's a photo of a plane, a biplane that he took
yep,
that the wing struts are inverted.
yeah,
So there would be these slight flaws to it, or almost as if uh like you're not getting a true vision, you're getting Ted's vision
right,
of you're getting someone, because like I am not an artist. I couldn't draw you a building I saw yesterday from memory. I could approximate it. Might get you
yeah,
there. I might get you halfway there. I might get you through 3/3 of the way there, but I'm not going to get it just right. And that's kind of like what Ted's doing here. Ted's just it because I don't know. It's coming from Ted's brain, not from the
right.
real world, I guess you would say.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's interesting on a number of levels, especially the spelling, because, like, as I already said, Ted couldn't spell for shit. So it
Oh, he
totally
couldn't.
makes sense that if he was imagining an airplane hangar, it makes sense that you'd see things um, misspelled because he didn't know how to spell.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, that's the crazy part, because the explanation is that he was somehow hiding a miniature transparency of a photograph inside the gizmo, and
Yes.
then also in every case being able to do this surreptitiously with everybody watching him and have enough light coming through the gizmo in order to make that appear on the film through the lens, even though, as we established, there are cases where they removed the lens entirely,
Yes, or shot pictures from another room.
Yeah, or did it in the dark, or did it from 50 feet away,
Yeah.
that is, so, and I mean, other people were handling the gizmo or the camera from time to time.
Yeah, and not to
I'm really
mention,
surprised nobody ever tried to say that the whiteys were caused by him like cracking the camera open briefly and exposing the film to light. That would make sense to me, but
yeah,
if that's the explanation, it doesn't account for the fact that would have hits with targets that he had no knowledge of. Otherwise,
yeah,
he would have to know in advance that they were going to do that. So that would be even more impressive, is he's precognitively uh,
yes,
hitting the target and then bringing a negative with him. Because I imagine it would have to be like microfilm or a film
yes,
negative that he chopped up and put inside the gizmo.
yeah,
But beyond that, with the alterations that his mind did, according to Eisenbud, he would have to also alter the image beforehand. So he would
yes,
have to change the spelling in that photo, or he'd have to change the windows to crosses, or he'd have to. So where was he getting these mocked up images that are
yeah.
taken from weird angles, or like, because they never find photos that match exactly what it is that Ted produces.
No, and there's
Oh,
other photos too where he did. There's photos where there's collages of different
yeah,
items in a room. There's photos that are like a series of two or three in a row that would be like an object coming into focus. Like
yeah,
there's one like a three picture set of the Washington Monument coming into focus. There are pictures. There's one that was he told them to go into another room. They took a picture, and in the picture there were he had changed the order of the people standing in a room. It was I don't there's one I'm still trying to figure out what it meant. I read it like 3 or 4 times. Like he told them to take a picture in another room, and in that picture was the room Ted was in with people standing in it that weren't in the room with Ted when the picture was taken. I don't understand how you do that, and I don't even quite understand the picture. Like,
yeah. It's because you get to a point where things are so weird that they're almost impossible to describe. And it's like you said, trying to explain it to your friends or like coworkers, like what this book is about, and they're like, "What the hell is wrong with you, man? Why do you read this weird shit? Like, I don't know what you're talking about."
yeah,
But when phenomena is that weird, I think it's easy to dispatch for a skeptic because they don't have to. Somebody like the Amazing Randy, I guess we could probably just address this now since I already kind of mentioned what his theory about it was.
yes,
um, uh, Somebody like the Amazing Randy doesn't actually need to contend seriously with the data or with the claims. He's not honestly making an effort to debunk it. He is just trying to get rid of it, right? And
yes,
that's easy for a skeptic to do, especially with somebody like Ted, because he's a drunk. Um, he's unemployed. He's a wild card. He's a wild character.
yeah.
Um, Kind of a roustabout, I guess.
Yes, he would be. I think he would be a roustabout. I think it qualifies.
And it's easy to dismiss that, but then it's just as easy for science and scientists that maybe even would be sympathetic to look at it, like parapsychologists,
Yeah,
to kind of just let it fall away and be like, well, like, I don't know what's going on. There were a lot of people that didn't want to see it in person more than once, and they'd be like, yeah, just send me the data when you're done with your weird experiments here.
yeah. There was. I think there's more than one person who basically said like, yeah, but what does it do? We're kind
Right.
of like, so what's the point though? It's like, and there, you're right. There wasn't a point to what Ted was doing. This wasn't going to reveal anything. You're not going to. It's too scattershot for like to try to be used like remote viewing was. It's too. There's no grand insight being gleaned from this. It's just a fucking weirdo putting pictures on a Polaroid, and there's nothing you can really get out of that. There's only
Right.
so far you can go with it. So I don't think it appealed to people who want more out of this kind of. They want a grand answer. They want answers to their questions about the paranormal or the afterlife or whatever. They
Yeah.
want more than just a fucking weirdo putting pictures on a Polaroid.
Yeah. And I mean, part of this kind of reminded me of remote viewing. Um,
I think there was definitely a hint of remote viewing in this, or at least like the germ of that idea. Like you could use this because you
right.
tried the whole Thresher thing. The woman was like, because that was a submarine that was lost, I believe. The Navy
Yeah.
lost a submarine. They didn't know where it was, and was like, well, maybe Ted can find it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just because Ted was interested, not it wasn't the target at the time, but Ted was obsessed with this Russian rocket
Yes.
um, that was going into space. So he ended up taking a photograph of that, and it just kind of looked like almost like a weird bottle shape. But
Yeah.
then I guess I hope I'm not confusing the timeline, but I think like a couple weeks later there was a published drawing of what this craft
Hmm.
was supposed to look like,
He
and then
was
that
he was also
yeah.
obsessed with getting a picture of Mars before Mariner 4 did. Like,
Yeah. See,
yeah,
that was the thing that reminded me of remote viewing. Like
same here,
they did.
exactly. That
Yeah.
wasn't. I remember reading about that. I think it was in the that Jim Mars UFO book. What was it called?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of what
The
it's called.
Alien Agenda.
Yes, Alien Agenda. Yes.
Yeah. Classic Jim Mars. But it was a thing that really happened. I think it was 1976. Somebody in the remote viewing program was trying to remote view Mars.
Didn't
Um,
what's his name? The guy who was always on Art Bell, Ingo Swan. Didn't he
yeah.
remote view Jupiter? I believe
Yes.
too. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I think they remote viewed the moon as well.
Hmm.
Um, or maybe it was one of the moons of Jupiter. I can't remember.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know Ingo Swan was doing some of that, and one of the other people was too, I believe. But I have a Fate magazine article about it somewhere.
Yeah.
But um, so, well, I mean, the other thing is that psychic photography existed way before Ted too. He wasn't the first person to do this. Um,
Yeah, there's a Japanese doctor. I want to find that book. That was one of the things I read in there. That I have got to find the book this guy wrote. He was
yeah,
having them.
Tomokichi
Yes,
Fukurai. Yeah,
yes. He was having people project just like simple things like letters and Japanese characters onto photographic plates through a sheet. Correct?
yeah, right.
Yeah, that was fascinating. I'm like, I need to know more about this.
Yeah, I think you can get copies of that. I mean, I was looking, this was back in like 1909, I think, when
Yes.
he published this book. Um, and I did find some old copies of it, but not too clear on how good the quality is. So I'm going to continue looking. But I think there are more modern editions of it. I just would recommend caution and
Yeah, of course.
make sure they're not just like weird print on demand
Hmm.
scans that are of questionable quality,
Usually
so
are.
yeah.
I'll check the Internet Archive as well. I'm sure I can find it. But I was like, that's definitely something I need to check out. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I think
this
I
is
did find digital copies, but I mean, you know me, I like to have uh the old one. So-
no, no. I don't. I have a habit of printing out, using my copier privileges at various jobs to print out books off Internet Archive, and
yeah.
now I have a book that I didn't have before. Thanks, Jack
Yeah.
Brewer. Um, but yes, no. So yeah, apparently, I know this is the spiritualism, things like that are a big interest of yours. But yeah, apparently, like photography. As soon as photography was invented, people were like, "Let's get pictures of ghosts immediately." That was the first order of
Yeah.
business.
Yeah, and I mean it's fairly easy to do with double exposures.
Hmm.
I think I think one of the earliest ones was near me. That Mumler guy in Boston was known for psychic photography.
Yeah,
Um, and the book that I've talked about in the past, um, Charles Heideria, the Jesuit priest
yeah,
in
yeah.
Worcester, did his own psychic photographs in the book, where he he didn't tell you how he did it, but he did tell you that they were fake. Like one of them's really cool because it's just like a big hand covering the two people that are sitting for a portrait.
That's pretty cool.
And I mean, the way you do that is that you open the shutter all the way, hold your hand in front of the photo for a little while, hold it there for about 10 seconds, and then close the shutter, and then take a normal photograph. You're gonna have this ghostly hand imprint there.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, which raised the question in our minds too. Would you be able to take a psychic thoughtograph with digital cameras that are on cell phones?
Yeah, I know we had talked about making our own gizmos and trying this. I have not had a chance to yet, but I think maybe before this goes up, it's something you and I need to do, is try to do our own. I do. If anyone listening to this has not done so, Ted was on TV a couple of times, and like, well, there is footage. People recorded Ted's photography experiments, and you got to see this guy in action. It's a riot. He is just, you called him a live wire. He's all full body energy. Like, he is just really into it. So I think we definitely need to get ourselves into the right frame of mind. We got to get shithouse drunk. Apparently, I'll have to start smoking. I'll have to start smoking again, and just stay up all night and try to get a picture on our cameras.
Yeah.
I think it's necessary at this point for science.
Yeah. I mean, it did seem like it required a lot of physical exertion on his part. So I don't know how down I would be for that, especially because he reported bleeding from the anus.
Yeah, there was. If it was a good session, he bled rectally. Yes. Doctor, there's more than a few anus references in this book. Dr. Eisenbud was a Freudian in every possible capacity.
Yeah, including being incredibly obsessed with breasts.
Well, there's breasts, and there's also very early in the book, Ted. Is it the first time they meet? Yes, it is. Yeah. It's the first time they meet in the hotel room in Chicago. It's not going well. They're not getting photos. Ted's getting pissed off, and Ted asks to take a shower.
Right.
And Ted goes and takes a shower, and he calls Dr. Eisenbud in and just like flashes him.
Yeah.
He's like, "Hey, dude." And then for the next 3 or 4 pages, Dr. Eisenbud cannot stop talking about Ted's penis. He brings it up, his how pleased Ted is with his penis, and how Ted wants you to know how pleased he is, and Ted wants to know how pleased you are with his penis. It has happened several times. This is like in the first 20 pages of the book, so you're in for a good ride.
But also during that time, Ted produced a photo that was of significance to Eisenbud.
Yes.
And this is what I would think of as a synchronicity, because it was something that was on Eisenbud's mind. And it's because it's so specific to Eisenbud, because he had the only reason he was in Chicago to begin with is because he had given a talk.
Yes, a lecture.
A lecture that hadn't gone well. Like, it wasn't received well, and people didn't seem to care. And it wasn't in Chicago. It was, I think, Cleveland or something like that. But he made Chicago on his way back. And it wasn't received well, but the lecture itself was about how the crescent symbol in ancient lithographs ancient symbols, and all the way through to like the archetype of that is supposed to symbolize breasts and like the divine feminine in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, he basically did a lecture on boobs for like an hour.
Yes.
And people were just rolling their eyes or not as interested. And in one of these pictures, there's a very obvious pair of breasts represented by the building that Ted hit.
No, it was. Well, I just read this because I just read this morning. It was not a building. It was streetlights.
Oh yeah.
But when you turned them over, when you turned the photo around, It was boobs. And I I'm not gonna say I saw the boobs. You know, I can no, I know boobs. They didn't look like boobs to me. I'm not.
Yeah.
I wasn't terribly like convinced that these were in fact the boobs that. But what it doesn't
Well, I mean, I
Eisenbud,
guess if you see boobs everywhere. Now, I
which
mean, like,
yeah, which apparently he does.
I'm not opposed to that, but like, I was looking at this photo and I just could not find the boobs. Like, I spent so long being like, what the hell is he
I
talking
did
about?
too. I did like on the I think because you can kind of see what he's talking about as far as like crescents, and one of them has a slightly darkened area that I guess could be a nipple. I guess, but I'm not. The boobs was, but the thing was that it was like a year later when Eisenbud
Right.
was like, he's like, oh, Ted was trying to tell me in his own special way that I was right. And also the same day they got a photo of a hotel that had the word Stevens on it. And it was an
Yeah.
old Chicago hotel that was no longer called the Stevens. So the photo was like would have to have been like 30 or 40 years old for it to have been labeled the Stevens Hotel. And the doctor who was like shooting down Eisenbud's theories was Dr. Stevens.
Right.
It was like, oh, Ted, you shouldn't have.
Yeah. But it wasn't spelled the same
No.
because the hotel had a V, Stevens with a V, and the doctor was with a PH.
Yes.
Um, but if you think about it, a V is just a crescent and also a boob. So
It's like those 50s pointy boobs from like the the Mamie Van Doren movies. Uh
yeah.
so that's what it was. So Ted being the man that he is, I'm sure had, you know, Girls Town or one of those girls in juvenile hall movies in mind, and
Yeah. The only thing I could think of at that part in the book was that scene from Naked Gun with Leslie Nielsen driving away from the airport. He's like,
everywhere I
everywhere
look,
I look,
I,
something reminds me of her.
yeah, that was that part. That was the other part that made me roll my eyes hard. Was when he was like, "Oh, Ted was just thinking of me," but he didn't realize he was thinking of me, and he was trying to make me
Yeah.
feel better. Like I don't doubt that
Like,
Ted has
he,
a
did,
soft side here and there, but I don't think this was it.
he didn't even know you yet, dude.
He just met you. Granted, you gave him a bottle of scotch, which in Ted's world is a pretty good gesture. Um,
Yep.
but yeah, the boobs thing. I was
Yeah.
a
I
bit
mean, I
much.
actually have in my notes here Jule Eisenbud, psychoanalyst, parentheses, obsessed with boobs.
Yeah, I had a couple of times in here. I have again with the fucking penis, goddamn Freudians. Um, yeah, and it's like okay, screaming, bashing his head on the floor, then stripped down to all of his phallic glory. Okay, Jule, calm, calm the fuck down, man. Then there's like, oh, there's also a lot of there's a part where uh, there's some part Ted's constipated. Like this book gets really, really into some very odd granular details of the process, and
Mhm.
he's talking about bowels for a while there, and he equates
Oh,
Ted being constipated to not being able to take a picture to get a thoughtograph.
yeah, I mean, and he also had his friend, one of his associates, that sat in on one of the things that had like a whole anal theory around psi abilities.
Yes,
Um,
the
uh,
anus
uh,
doctor, the anus investigator.
the anus guy, yeah, I think he
Yes,
actually refers to him as that.
he calls him the anus investigator. Um,
Well, because he didn't want to use the guy's real name. Apparently, the guy didn't want his name in the book, so he's just like, so my anus friend, uh, the third man. A third man, also a friend of long standing, seemed to be more interested in discussing his own latest research interest, a new approach via communication theory to the psychophysiology of the anus.
oh my gosh, yeah, Freudians, man. This is what you're gonna get when you get hang out with a bunch of Freudians for a while. Uh,
Yeah, like I can't claim to really understand psychoanalysis. Like I'm not as I know people love Jung. I'm not as well read on Jung as a lot of people are, and I assume a lot of people haven't read as much Jung as they let on, but Freud, all the psychoanalysis that I've ever read, I'm just like, you know, it might not be that it's a universal human thing that all of these things are related to sex. It's maybe just these guys just couldn't stop thinking about sex. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. Like, I don't pretend to know more about this than I do, but yeah, and I do think the Freud thing is pretty well discounted at this point, and you're not going to find a lot of pure Freudians out there. I think Freud
Right.
kind of gets a lot of love, just kind of like, hey, thanks for being the first, right? You know, someone had to be the first to do this. Freud was the first to do this. You gotta love him for that. Thanks for starting our field, but we don't need all the penis butthole talk. It's good. We're good now. Not everything's breast, dude. Stop. Just because someone took a picture of a headlight doesn't mean he thinks he's helping you. He's helping your breast ideas. We're done. I mean, and the thing is too. I mean, the whole boob thing for Ted. I mean, he was a mama's boy, so maybe that was it. Maybe that was the boobs thing for Ted.
Yeah.
He had like.
See, now we're doing it. You know.
Well,
I mean,
it's in there too. It's in the book. Eisenbud theorizes the same thing, that Ted keeps going back to boobs because he misses his mom. He lived a block from his mother his whole life. You know, like Ted loved mama.
And his dad died when he was relatively young.
I think we're leaving out the most important thing here. Ted's dad was a professional wrestler.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That is awesome. Ted's dad was a professional wrestler.
And then he retired from that and started his own little cafe.
A Greek man who started a Greek diner. God bless him.
Yeah, a Greek Chicago diner. I can only imagine. I'd love to go back in time and have a gyro there.
100%. That's going to be a hell of a sandwich. I guarantee you. I have this image of a giant swarthy Greek man just fix me up a big old hoagie. Here you go. You know, a big like French dip. Like, oh, this is fantastic. Oh, this is the best sandwich I've ever had. Homemade pickles and stuff. Like Kalamata. I'm down to eat at the Serios diner right now if it existed.
Yeah. I would at least like a thoughtograph of it.
Ed, can we get a thoughtograph of, like, you know, the moussaka at your dad's diner, please? Can we work on this? I'm sure it's great.
I need some baklava right now.
Exactly. Let's work on this. You guys I can guarantee the coffee there is probably just like just knock your socks off, man. I'm sure it was great.
Yeah.
Should we stuff. I meant to mention this earlier.
Out of cigarettes.
Oh, there was definitely a lot of cigarettes going on. I'm sure. I would have to imagine there wasn't a breath in Ted's dad's body that didn't come through a cigarette. Unfiltered, no questions asked. Yeah. But I did mean to mention this earlier because I had forgotten about this. We had talked about the remote viewing. How Ted found his powers is absolutely fascinating, and we didn't touch on that. Do you remember how Ted found his powers?
Right. Yeah. Now, I'm glad you brought this up because I would have forgotten to mention it. But also, nobody ever mentions this.
No, it's the craziest story.
Outside of this book, I have never ever heard this part of it, which is like the origin story for Ted Serios' ability to thoughtograph.
It might be the most fascinating part of this book. It's insane. I thought this was the best part of the book. I can't believe he waited till like the last chapter to put this in there.
Yeah,
he gives you like 90 pages of dry ass shit about all the different experiments and all of his theories on, you know, archetypes and shit. And then at the very end, it's like, oh yeah, there's pirates. There's fucking pirates. And no one mentioned pirates earlier.
It's during the only stable time in his life when he's working as a bellhop. One of the people he works with at the hotel, a man named George Johannes, found that Ted was easily susceptible to hypnosis.
He was like an amateur hypnotist, huh?
But I mean, I think there was a spiritual component to it too, because they mentioned that he was like, he worked with like the ideas of Mesmer, Anton Mesmer, where mesmerism is kind of, it's not the same thing as hypnosis. A lot of people conflate them, but there is a lineage there. Hypnosis comes out of mesmerism. But Anton Mesmer believed that everybody had basically magnetic fields, animal magnetism.
Animal magnetism. Great Scorpions album, by the way. But yeah, go
right. So essentially, he had Ted channeling the pirate Jean Lafitte.
Okay, now I need a clarification. Did Ted choose Jean Lafitte? Did George Johannes choose Jean Lafitte, or did Jean Lafitte just appear? I was unclear on that.
Well, all right. So I mean, in spiritualism, if most mediums classically will have what's called a control.
Yes.
And this is the spirit that shows up and allows them to talk to other spirits.
Yeah.
So they're kind of like the middleman.
Holds their hand, walks them through it. Yes.
Right. So I think Lafitte was just Serios's control spirit, but he seems to be like the only one Serios was really talking to.
Yeah.
So I don't know that anybody chose that. It didn't seem to be the case. But also what they were trying to get out of it was helping to find buried treasure.
It started off like asking Ted to go walk around places. Like it would start off like, hey, go check out, I think like South Africa was one of them, a couple of different places, just to see if Ted could go there and see it and describe
it. Which
it.
Which again is a lot like remote viewing.
Remote viewing, yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what it's remote viewing.
But yeah, I mean, and then even when he wasn't trying to do that, Lafitte would be like present in these like trance visions and stuff. So like I guess this resulted in a few attempts by George Johannes and maybe like associates of his to go try to dig up treasure in different places, but never actually worked. But I mean, I've heard of this before where like Uri Geller would do similar things. Like people would hire him to like psychically find out where treasure was buried, or like where to drill for oil and stuff like that.
Okay, it says here, I had to look this up because it was driving me crazy. Ted began to show promise along these lines as finding loot that the guide suggested be Jean Lafitte. Someone suggested Jean Lafitte. Doesn't say who. So it was suggested that Ted take on Jean Lafitte as his guide, and then Jean Lafitte appeared. I don't know how this works. Do you just ask for Jean Lafitte? Is he available? Is he on another job for somebody else? Is he doing a racketeering gig for the Brooklyn DA? What's going on? I don't know how this works.
Yeah. Well, and I thought this was funny too because it's related to history in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, I of course everything down here is Jean Lafitte. He's a very big local hero down here in New Orleans. We have a whole parish named after him, a whole city named after him. My friends and I, when we were just out of high school and for the first of our lives had no curfews, we'd go take and drive down to Lafitte and drive around these swamp back roads and stuff like that. So it was always I have a lot of fondness for Lafitte.
Yeah. So I mean, that's cool kind of a
cool place.
Cool unexpected synchronicity there.
I was happy to see Jean Lafitte, and I just thought it was just fucking great that like this there in our University of New Orleans, the mascot's the Privateers because of Jean Lafitte, and it's like this swarthy, handsome, swashbuckling guy with a big mustache and a saber, and so I'm picturing the UNO mascot guiding Ted through like the cosmos. And or if any football fans out there would remember the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, their old mascot was the Buccaneer. This again, a swarthy, mustachioed gentleman, a mustache not unlike your own, AP. So I just picturing this guy, like helping Ted through locate loot. I like the word loot too. I don't think we use the word loot enough anymore.
Yeah,
they found his
booty.
Well, of course. Well,
Yeah, booty's also good,
But no one's looking for loot anymore. No one's searching for loot. No one's digging up loot anymore. It's just one of those words I wish would come back into with Crumb Bum,
Yeah.
Crumb Bum's looking for loot. It's great.
Yeah. That and giving someone the business.
Ted gave a lot of people the business, I'm sure. Ted was given a
What are
lot
you?
of business.
What are you giving me the business?
Hey,
Yeah.
hey, you crumb
I love
bum.
that.
As see some great Ted quotes. I'll save great Ted quotes for later because we were talking about. So yes, Ted, his friend George is having Ted go on these psychic journeys to find loot, and they apparently found stuff, is what they say in the book.
Yeah.
But they got there too late. Like they came upon other people digging up like a box of money,
Right. Right.
and they're like, "Shit, we're late." Ted, here's an idea. Can you take a picture of the place you see the flute so we can get there faster and find it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Ted starts fucking around with a camera and taking pictures. It starts out, he just takes pictures of the wall
Yeah. Yeah.
and he starts getting things, right? He starts
Yeah.
getting
Yep.
images. And
Yeah.
go ahead, continue.
Well, and I'm going to say the wild part about this is that he produces these things and then he gets kind of obsessed with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he throws it all away. Like he throws the camera away eventually and the photos and everything because he decides that it's just this unhealthy delusion that he developed.
He
I
goes to a
mean,
doctor too, right?
right. And that's what the doctor tells him. The doctor
Yeah.
basically tells him, you're just delusional.
Mm-hmm.
But he has actual evidence of it. So, like, he's producing physical evidence of something very paranormal. And it's freaking him out. Like, he doesn't know what to do with that. So, and he goes to a doctor. The doctor tells him that he's losing his grip and he needs to stop doing whatever he's doing.
Yeah.
So he just gives up on it. And he convinces himself that he was crazy before, like, a couple of years later, he decides to try it again. And
Well, he was
back
hypnotized by the doctor who,
right.
He was him, and then the hypnotism wears off apparently, and so Ted decides to try it again.
Yeah.
And this is when he starts experimenting with it, like trying different methods to get the photos.
Yeah. Yep. But I mean, that is a wild thing. And it's like one of these central things to the book. And one of the central things to the paranormal really is that no matter how much proof you get, a lot of the time, at the end of the day, people are going to walk away from it if they don't know like how to categorize it or what the mechanism is or how to describe it or find a use for it. You know, like even Ted himself tried to walk away from it. You know, like
it's like his power is it's unfortunately because it's kind of uncontrollable. It's never going to go above the level of a parlor trick. It's always going to be this really cool fucking thing he can do that is of no real use to anybody, which is unfortunate because it's I don't know, you can't categorize it, but it's something incredible.
Yeah, I mean, and it certainly seems that way to me. But I find this with a lot of people, and that tend to get discarded or disregarded, and that's why I have a certain affinity for the people that are like absolutely ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And I've applied this same logic for years now, and I had started with the theory that the most ridiculous sounding stories are probably the ones that have something we can benefit from learning. Like the ridiculousness there is there to make us discard it, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
And then when you apply that to people too, I had like a dark night of the soul with that because I was like Uri Geller is somebody that I've gone back and forth with over the years, and I'm just like, I mean, now like fuck him just because of his political beliefs, but
yeah,
like, but I mean, over the years, it's just been like, oh, haha, that guy, you know, like what a joker, you know, and then, but it occurred to me if I have to like stick to my own rules here, like a lot of the stuff he claims to be able to do is ridiculous, and a lot of people think he's just a hoaxer and doing like the spoon bending and stuff like that. And I'm like, there probably actually is something worth looking into there because it's so ridiculous, you know.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, he's apparently done his own thought photography, but you see this is true with other characters. Like one of the best direct correlations to Serios, I think, is Ted Owens. I don't know how familiar you are with
I know
Owens.
the name. What remind me?
Uh, well, he was the PK man.
Yes, the PK man. Yeah, yeah.
And,
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yes.
yeah, also an alcoholic, also kind of like a quirky, abrasive character in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
His psychic contact with was with mantid beings on a flying saucer that he referred to as SIs, or space intelligences,
Mm-hmm.
and he worked under test conditions with JB and Louisa Ryan when he was young,
Mm-hmm.
and then later with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, who was the one that ended up writing the book about him. Um, and he's somebody that has like a whole list of accurate weather predictions that he made.
Mm-hmm.
You could consider them predictions, or you could say that they were something that he
Created.
made happen. He
Yeah.
manifested, But he is said to have also caused UFO sightings,
Mm-hmm.
blackouts, um, um, all kinds of anomalies, and this is all stuff that's documented
Mm-hmm.
in a way that you could classify as very scientific.
Yeah.
Um, but he's a ridiculous person, and he's a drunk, and he says he's talking to space mantoids, like so. A lot of people don't even know about him. Like he's just a name that's kind of like if you say PK man, maybe people do, but if you just say Ted Owens, like it's kind of you have to sit there and think about it. But he's like kind of one of my favorite guys because he's so out there, so ridiculous,
Yeah.
and he's a lot like Ted Serios. Where
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. No, Ted Serios is one of those. I mean, I guess that even when I was not looking into this stuff anymore, I was doing other things in my life. Like it's always one of those just thoughts that I always came back to in my life was this Ted Serios guy. Because I always thought it was the most fascinating story, and that just the photographs they have a way of working into your mind. You don't forget those photos. They're eerie, they're creepy, they're amazing, and they're just inexplicable. Like, and I've always just this one of those stories that stuck with me my whole life. And
mm-hmm.
like, and like I said, the first book I purchased on Amazon was The World of Ted Serios because I've had this like lifelong fascination with this guy. Because yeah, he is ridiculous. He's a madman. And I remember too seeing. I think there was. I do believe he was on In Search Of at some point, and
Mm-hmm.
he was definitely on Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious Powers, or the hell that show was called. He's on
Right.
Discovery. So I remember seeing footage of the guy being crazy, and so it's always just yeah, the most outlandish people are the ones that I have a fondness for as well.
Yeah, and it was the Arthur C. Clarke show. Was It's not Mysterious Universe,
It's like
Mysterious something.
unexplained powers, something like that.
Yeah,
Has the crystal
um,
skull in the eyeball. That's
yeah,
like the yeah.
right. It was that show where those two guys demonstrated like how the gizmo worked.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and they claimed that James Randi was the one that had figured it out. I think.
Yeah, and
It-
the
it-
thing is, like, if you do that, you do get something that is similar to what Ted Serios was doing.
right.
Like, you can make a photograph that looks, for all intents and purposes, similar to a Ted Serios photograph or thoughtograph, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But never once has anyone ever done that under the conditions that Ted Serios was working under.
Right.
And that's the rub there. It's like, yes, of course you can everything. You can show me how to bend a spoon. You could show me how to fake a weather report to some detail. If you know enough
Mm-hmm.
about the weather and how it works, you could try to fake your way through that. Or there's a lot of ways to fake this stuff, but yeah, no one is. I mean, was it Eisenbud who offered James Randi like, look, I'll let you get trashed. You can get as drunk
Right.
as Ted gets and show me how to do this. Like,
Yeah.
no one's ever done it under the same conditions that Ted's done it.
Right. Yeah, and basically Randy got on TV and declared that he could easily reproduce it, and everybody just took his word for it
His word for it,
and
yeah.
moved on. And then Eisenbud was like, "All right, well,
Let's
make
do it.
good on that and just do it, but you have
Yeah.
to do it under the same conditions, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And and Randy just kept weaseling out of it. And that's the thing is like he had a habit of doing that. He would always, and that's what a lot of these conjurer, like magician skeptics do, is they define their own rules for how it's going to work. And then if you take them up on their debunking method, then they still want to define the terms. And they'll find whatever way they can to weasel out of actually doing it, because it's not as important to demonstrate the trick. The important part is instilling in the minds of the people that it is a trick.
Yes.
You know, so I mean that's why you have the disciples of James Randi are like Penn and Teller, who I generally like, but
same here.
I mean, but they're kind of that same ilk, where like anybody that believes anything spiritual or metaphysical is full of it,
Yeah. Well, and it's like I'm all for the James Randis of the world going out there and taking down the Sylvia Browns and the John Edwards of the world. Like,
right.
Yeah, fuck those people. They're scumbags and they're taking money from people who are in pain and suffering and making fools of them. And if you want to take those fuckers down, be my guest all day, every day. I'll even help you pay for it. But like if you're that's good and that's decent thing to do. But yeah, there's no reason. Who's Ted hurting by doing these photographs? Like, why do you, I don't know. Why the rush to disparage this? Why the rush to prove it as fake? I don't see.
Yeah, it's kind of just like another notch in his belt or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I said, there's people out there doing actual harm. You could buy if you want to go ruin their careers. Be my guest.
Yeah,
but Ted's not Ted harms. Ted was harming lots of people. Never mind. I'll take that back. Ted was a piece of. Ted was a scumbag. But yeah,
not with the photos though.
No, with the photos. The photos are cool, and that's
the worst that would happen is he would expose himself to somebody while doing the photos. But
usually a consenting adult, at least. He did wreck a car once too. That was kind of great. Where did the goddamn road go?
Yeah.
Goddamn road go. What was the other one? The another great Ted quote where he screamed it when or probably my Ted quotes here. I'll show you, goddamn son of a bitch and bastards, what's funny.
Yeah.
Son of a bitchin'. One word.
Not gonna lie, I have used that before.
I'll show you, goddamn son of a bitch and bastards, what's funny.
Well, that was okay. So that was when he was taking a test with an electroencephalograph attached to him. So he had like electrodes and things stuck in his hair and to his head, all these to monitor him while he was doing this.
Go ahead.
The EEG guy was just like, nah, something funny is going on here.
Yeah, he took the first. He shot off the first the next photo just to get it out of the roll in case he was doing something ahead of time to the film.
Right.
So he's like, in case there's some funny business going on, he snapped off the first photograph and threw it away. And Ted got insulted by the funny business line.
Yeah, and it was like but it seemed like it was a slow burn. Like it started to sink in with him, and then he got pissed, and he's just like, "I'll show those son of a bitch and assholes what's fucking funny." And he's like ripping things out of it. He's like ripping his own hair out.
Yeah, and he starts like grabbing shit up the walls and throwing it around, and like stormed his way out the office, slamming doors. And oh man, that's just great. I just don't. I think that's one of the things we're missing here these days is characters. This guy's a character, and I wish there had been more opportunities to get a taste of Ted Serios in this world. Like,
yeah, but I think we all knew somebody that was sort of that kind of character.
Yeah, of course we do. Yeah, I mean, you and I have long service industry careers, so I know that we've met more than our share of like just fucking wingnuts.
And I mean, I think like people, it's certainly of an era too. So I mean, some of those people were still around when we were kids. If you were at like a cookout, like in a public place or something, or the big family gathering or something. And there would always be one of those old men around that's like, "Oh yeah, pour me a little shot of that. It's for my cold, for my cold, you know." That was like one of Ted's jokes, and like nobody ever thought it was funny, but he would try it all the time. like, oh, it's just for my cough, you know.
Yeah, there's definitely like Uncle Ted vibes.
Yeah,
Where he's not
yeah,
really your uncle. He's just a guy who lived next door to your grandparents like 40 years ago, but he keeps showing up at family functions, and you just call
yeah,
him Uncle Ted. You're not related to
yeah.
him, really. Oh yeah, definitely Uncle Ted vibes. But
That's
just in
exactly who
general,
he
though,
is.
he's a hell of a character, and I just
Yep.
it's a shame that he wasn't on TV more. You don't have enough, you don't have more footage of this guy because there is that really cool footage of him affecting a TV camera, which is
Mhm.
fucking cool as shit. Like, I'm
That
sorry,
was wild.
that is really cool. I sent you that, didn't I?
Yeah, yeah, it was wild. So we'll recommend
Yeah,
that people go. I think it's like was it like German TV because it was like a German voiceover.
it might have been. It's like
Yeah,
it's a 43-second clip, and Ted like runs up to the TV camera and throws his hands over the camera and starts doing his thing. God,
yeah,
he goes like, got it, and then for like a splash, there's a fucking building there.
yeah,
Like, that's cool. Like, I don't know.
yeah, yeah. Which goes to show that this works on other levels,
Yeah.
and like I mean, that's what was significant about the Polaroid cameras too, is that in the past, anybody that had ever done thought photography did it with a more conventional camera or
Hmm.
one that had plates. You know, the
Yeah.
old cameras had plates, and in those cases, there was ample ability to tamper with it. With
Yes.
a Polaroid, it's developing right in front of everybody's eyes. Like there's no dark room, there's no messing with it ahead of time. Like they're pulling the photo out and watching it develop.
Oh yeah, they even
So
went so far as to have film bought in California, sealed in a lead box, and
yeah,
mailed to them, and not open till the very second it was used. I mean, they went to some pretty lengthy, you know, some
yeah,
great lengths to make sure that
precautions.
yeah,
Yeah,
to make sure that this to kind of there's like like I said, there's a tooth like a third of the book is just this really excruciating minutia of how they did every one of these tests and all the different ways they tried to shield out electromagnetic activity and radiation and infrared and any number of things. The middle of the book is quite dry, but it does show you the lengths that these guys went to try to get
yeah,
the proof here. This wasn't just like as much as it kind of turned into a parlor trick sometimes because you can't help it with a guy like Ted Serios. Like he's gonna start doing his carny routine. And he's gonna be on. He's gonna be
yeah,
shirtless and chain smoking and chugging scotch in your living room, and it's kind of hard to keep it serious at that point. But they were really trying hard to keep this as contained as possible and get proof. This
yeah,
wasn't a joke.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, that's all he wanted, I guess, was a little respect and a little booze and
But it does
a lot
occur
of
to me
booze.
too, though, that Ted's never really all that curious as to how he can do it.
Yeah, he doesn't care.
He really doesn't have any
That's for
like,
somebody else to figure out. Yeah,
yeah, he has no insight as to like. I'm sorry if I just woke up one day with the ability to take pictures with my mind, I would have a lot of really deep, serious, like existential questions at this point. Like, I'd be
uh, well, I don't know. Just because having produced results with some magical operations in the past, I've realized that whenever I've thought too hard about the mechanism behind it, it makes it that much harder to actually do it the next time. Like
I guess what
sometimes,
I'm missing though too is that it's Ted Serios. He would never. Of course I can. I'm fucking Ted
mhm,
Serios.
right?
Of
Yeah,
course it'd be
exactly.
me. Of
That's the
course
way
I
he's
can.
thinking about it.
Yeah,
Um,
I guess that's
i-
what it is. He's like, yeah, of
in
course I
my
can.
own mind, I think it's like a flow state sort of thing, where if I was able to do something and that shouldn't be able to be done, and I, I have done some pretty crazy things in my life, but like if I sit there and wonder about it and try to pick it apart and figure out what the mechanism is, um, the next time I try to do it, I'm going to be thinking about that instead.
Oh yeah, no,
It's like if
I'm
you were playing basketball and you were just in a flow state and just hitting, like just the net time
oh yeah,
over and
no.
over again. Then you started thinking about what it is. What is it that I'm doing right now that's making me so good? You instantly start messing up, right?
Well, one of the
Like
things that struck
so,
me, no, I'm very much I when I play basketball, if I think about it, I can't shoot. When I
right?
I discovered too. A couple years ago, I started taking guitar lessons again for a while. I started playing for a while again. I hadn't played in years, and when I'd be playing at home and practicing, I'd be doing just fine. I go to a
Mhm.
lesson and sit in front of my teacher. I can't do shit. I fuck everything up.
Yeah.
I can't do
Yeah.
it. And it also, one thing about Ted that made me that I thought about it myself, not to put myself in the same category as the great Ted Serios, but like when I'm in school, when I would be in grad school, I or in college, I can't write a paper. Just I can't do it. I have to
Yeah.
be under the worst possible pressure, under a time limit, and as soon as everything is in, like, all the pressure is on me, and I can't think about it anymore. I just have to fucking do it. It just kind of comes out of me. It's like
Right.
like an incantation at this point. Just boom, it's there. And
Right.
and that's kind of what Ted would do. He just ratcheted up the pressure over and over again. Get drunker, get crazier. Nothing's happened. And when everyone's getting ready to leave, everyone's miserable and tired and bored, and once they get the hell out of there, all of a sudden they start showing up. That's when
Right.
Ted gets
Right.
hot, 2:30 in the morning, and you got to work
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, that seemed to be how Ted worked too. It was just like this absolute, yeah, this flow state that Ted would put himself into, and bam, there's a water tower or whatever else you can come up with.
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of funny too because he did eventually just lose it. And like, there was one time he got a picture, and it was just a picture of some curtains,
Yeah.
and he
Yes.
never
Oh,
got a photo of anything like
that is
ever
so
again
great.
after
That is the
that.
best.
And
Yes. The
yeah,
last photo was curtains.
yeah, and the Eisenbud like recognizes immediately, like, well, that's the final curtain.
Yep.
That's it. Like,
Well, Ted did it his way.
yeah,
And but yeah, there in that Arthur C. Clarke thing. They meet up again, like in the 80s, I guess, whenever that was
yeah,
filmed. I guess it was the late 70s, early 80s. Ted looks like fucking shit. Ted looks terrible.
right,
And they try to do it again, and it's just pictures of Ted's face, which are also kind of cool. I actually like a few of those for my
yeah,
wall. It's just these close-ups of Ted's like crazy eyes, and it's yeah, the fact that Ted Serios lived to 2006 too just absolutely amazes me. Like,
yep, yep. He's just one of those old sauced individuals that just never kicks the bucket, I guess.
yeah, no, it's in very whenever like the when the world's oldest person dies, and they go
Yeah,
to interview the next person, whoever's the next person in line, like, so, and always a 118-year-old man in Japan who drinks about a quart of wild turkey a day.
yeah,
And I only smoke 3 cigarettes a day. Like, oh, okay, well, you're good then. It's
yeah,
always that way. Yeah, I live off raw meat, wild turkey, and three Winstons a day, and that's how I keep myself alive. And like, of course you
yeah,
do.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think we've pretty adequately covered this. There's a lot of different avenues you could probably keep going down with this and pulling apart. And
Yeah,
uh,
I mean, I really didn't know how we were going to talk about it. Honestly, I'm just
me
reading
either.
it, and it's just like it's
Yeah,
just this mess.
yeah, yeah. And like I said earlier, it's the kind of thing where you could just say, "Well, this guy took pictures with his like psychic projections."
Yeah,
His inner mind. He took pictures of his inner mind with the Polaroid camera, and there was a doctor who studied it, and that's the story. And that really is like what it is. Um,
yeah,
but I mean, I guess the greater story, the legacy there is almost non-existent. It's just that Serios almost gets forgotten about entirely, or just thought of as being somebody that managed to perpetuate some kind of crazy hoax for a couple of years in the '60s.
yeah,
Um, but but I don't know. There's a lot more going on. I mean, like we said, there's a channeled pirate. There's like um,
yeah,
the nature of the photos themselves and the way that they seem to be subverted versions of reality with maybe some insights into Ted's psyche going on there.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
there was like even an X Files episode where like the killer was a thoughtographer. Like his thoughts were being projected onto films, and they had to
Yeah,
use the thoughographs as clues.
I need to watch this one. That's my dirty secret. I've never seen the X Files. I'm sorry,
Right.
folks. I
Season
apologize.
4, episode 4. Um, it's called Unruhe, which is like a German word.
Yeah,
A lot of the titles of those shows are X-Files love their little German titles, but it's a pretty cool episode. I mean, and it's funny because I remember watching it when it first aired, and I'm like a lot younger, and I'm just like, oh, that's the Ted Serios thing, like,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah. It's
Mulder name dropped Serios in it because I
That's
mean, you always,
fantastic. That makes me
yeah,
very happy.
yeah,
I just think I think Ted Serios is one of those guys. Like I hope I hope a writer writes a novel about Ted. He seems like he would be like right at home in like a Pynchon novel. Like Ted
yeah,
Serios should have been in a Pynchon in a Thomas Pynchon novel at some point, and or at least a footnote in a David Foster Wallace novel, something like that, because it
right.
just seems like one of those characters who exists on the fringes, who lived a pretty extraordinary life, did extraordinary fucking things, and just gets forgotten. And that's really makes me sad. And
I still think like a Ted and Jule 60s style sitcom or 70s style, probably like a 70s sitcom of Ted and Jule, like,
yeah, or like a detective show, Ted Serios PD or
yeah,
PI or something like he photographs the crime scene, and yeah, like just like
yeah,
the X-Files episode, he like finds clues and
right,
just like it's just no like it's like Columbo, except that there's a guy with no shirt on screaming at a camera. uh
right,
Come into the bathroom,
yeah.
I need to tell you something. Ah. and, yeah, it's just naked Ted.
What are you doing, Ted? I'm trying to find the son of a bitch and murderer. Is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, this is a good show, and I think I'd watch this show. It, yeah, I know. And when we first talked about this, I think like 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, you were like, "Hey, let's do this show," and yeah, here's a date. We'll do it this day. I'm like, great. So I started looking online for things, and there was actually more than I thought. Like, there's a couple of podcasts covered this already. There's a
Mhm.
couple of like videos where people talking about it, and I intended to watch all of that, but then I read the book, and I was like, there's nothing I'm going to glean from these anyone else talking about this. I think that the story of Ted Serios is just it's in the book. That's all there is to it, and there's really nothing more to explain. All you can do is kind of like let the book wash over you and try to make sense of what you read. And
Yeah,
I think that trying to explain Ted Serios is absolutely fruitless.
yeah, yeah. But he was a fascinating character, and this is a fascinating study. And at the end of it, I don't know what to make of it really, but I figured there's still got to be these people out there, and it kind of shows you the value of some of these obsolete media or obsolete tools of media, like
Yeah,
film cameras. Like film cameras they're still around, obviously. Like people still do take film photos, but they're not nearly as prevalent as they were. It was
no,
once the only option, but it would be interesting to see if you could actually reproduce some of this stuff digitally.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but on
I
the other hand, it just reinforces the value of keeping some of that analog equipment around. Like,
and mhm.
yeah,
No, absolutely, it does. And I haven't. I think the last time I owned a camera, it's been decades that I actually owned an actual film camera, and it makes you
right,
kind of want to go to the thrift store and find one. But it also reminds me too that I think something that people who are interested in the stuff like you and I are, and all the people listening, go to the library and find these old 70s books like The Unexplained that have
yeah,
like just these compendiums of weird stories from the 70s and 60s, because there's got to be more of these guys out there.
yeah,
There's another Ted Serios out there to be discovered and to be talked about. And I would think of another one that kind of now has a nice kind of a resurgence in popularity is the Pascagoula incident, which is one of those other stories that always stuck with me in my life, because Pascagoula is like an hour from where I live, and that's another story that's completely bonkers and just
yeah,
unlike any other abduction story in the literature. And I'm glad to see that story is getting a resurgence of popularity now, and hopefully there's more stories like that out there that people can start looking into again, because those crazy stories are out there, and I think they should be told.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, so as we bring this to the close, to a close, as it were,
Curtains,
um,
if you will.
curtains as the curtains drop.
Yep.
we faced that final curtain. You know,
Yep, yep.
mistakes we've made a few, but
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. We know that. We're just
that's
humans,
what
man.
editing is for. The magic
Yeah.
of editing. You know, um, can't promise I'll get it all. Sometimes I just give up and like whatever. I stuttered there. Deal with it, people. Um,
Well,
uh, yeah. So I mean, what's on the what's on tap for you? You're how far are you into the Broken trading
it
card
looks like
of
I'll be
rock
done
stars?
end of May, early June. If it actually occurs to me right now, I forgot to do one today. I'm gonna have to do one over dinner tonight. I completely
Ah,
forgot.
right.
But yeah, that's all I've got on the plate right now. Just work and idiot hair metal trading cards. I'm running out of good ones though. It's getting hard. Like I got nothing to say about Testament and Exodus. I'm losing shit. Like losing out. I'm running out of things to say. I can't make fun of ACDC. Like really, what do you make? How do you make fun of ACDC? You don't. You just kind of like enjoy ACDC. So I'm
Yeah,
hoping I pull some better ones out soon. But you know, it's a passion project at this point. It's just I mean I'm I started out hoping I get answers for about what Brockham was thinking and what they were up to. That's never gonna happen.
yeah,
So at this point, it's just like I need to see this through, and maybe I'll get something out of it.
yeah. All right. Well, good.
Yeah. Otherwise,
Well,
I'm just hanging out in my house, working. It's about to get we might get snow in New Orleans this week, so that's exciting. That doesn't
yeah,
happen very often, so
yeah,
looking
yeah.
forward to
We're
that.
definitely getting snow here, so that's it's kind of nice because we haven't for the last couple of winters. So
Yeah,
it's good to have a return to normalcy in the Northeast.
yeah,
But
I'm looking forward to 25 degrees in New Orleans is really unusual, and people don't know how to handle it. I
yeah,
mean, give us a hurricane or a flood, and we're fine. We'll just drink beer through the whole thing, and then go out and clean up later. But
yeah,
25 degrees is just that's absolutely it just makes everyone here lose their minds. They can't drive
yeah,
anymore. We don't have to go to work. Like it's just cold.
yeah,
It's just cold weather. You've opened your fridge before. It's just like that. But it's only outside now. That's it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well.
All right then. Well, thank you for being my very first return guest.
I want to immediately apologize to your fans for that. Listeners, I apologize. And I want to apologize for my first appearance. I was heavily caffeinated and just way too excited to talk about RoboCop. I think I was more subdued this time, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think people enjoyed that one. I did get good feedback on that. So,
I do request to be back for another third time's a charm. I have a lot of ideas. So
okay.
if you have any you want to throw at me, I'm always down.
All right. Yeah, that sounds great.
All right.
So, all right, man. Well, Black Wolf, thank you again, and I will talk to you soon.
It was a pleasure, sir. Have a good one.